The Korean War began on June 25th, 1950. It started with over 75,000 soldiers from the North Korean army that crossed the 38th parallel, which divides the North from the South, and invaded the borders to South Korea. North Korea was backed by the Soviet Union, and the South was backed by the United States of America. By July, American troops arrived and entered the war on South Koreans' behalf. Over 5 million soldiers and civilians lost their lives during the war. By 1953, after back and forth, the Korean War came to an end. On July 27, 1953, the North and South Korea agreed to a truce. However, the countries still remain divided. Now, conscription in South Korea requires male citizens between the ages of 18 to 35 to perform mandatory military service. Every able-bodied male that passes a physical must enter the military for a minimum of 1 year and 6 months. Regardless if people have families or successful careers, they must serve in the military. Thus, significant action should be taken to abolish mandatory military service in South Korea. First, I will explain why mandatory military in South Korea is a problem. Then, I will describe the causes of mandatory military service. And finally, I will cover a couple alternatives to mandatory military service in South Korea. South Korean males are being forced to join the military, and without action, it is only going to get worse. Conscription in South Korea is defined as mandatory military service for males ages 18 to 35. The Korean War ended in 1953. However, South Korean policies state all males must serve in the military. According to an article in the New York Times by Maria Padilla in 2019, the reporter states that draft exemptions are highly sought after in South Korea. More than 230,000 young men each year must interrupt their life, including studies, families, and/or careers, to join the military. Superstar K-pop group BTS, who has won multiple awards worldwide and has topped the Billboard charts with multiple records, faces a potential dilemma with members facing said duties and postponing their careers at their peak. In 2015, John Power, a reporter, reported in the Narratively magazine that Young Chun, a dual citizen of the United States and South Korea, who was in Korea teaching English, just trying to pay off some student loans, recalls, everything was fine until he received a letter from the government requiring him to join the military. Young, who grew up in the United States and barely spoke the language fluently, recalls that he was very scared, and at the same time, there's no way that this is true. His experience was not a good one, as he experienced bullying, and his worst memory was being in a gas-filled room, nearly choking to death. Now that we have established that mandatory military service in South Korea is a problem, let's talk about what causes it. There are two leading causes of mandatory military service, and that's the threat of North Korea and extended deterrence. According to an article in 2018 by Paul Gregory, a professor and researcher at the Hoover Institution, published at Hoover Digest Research and Opinion on Public Policy, with universal conscription, access to United States weaponry, and a powerful economy, the South Korean Army has over 400,000 and 4.5 million reserves, and they should be able to stand up to the North Army of only 1.2 million, and that they lack a visible air force. Now I know what you might be thinking, North Korea's nuclear power. But what if I were to tell you that even without mandatory military service, the South Korean military can defend itself? According to Gregory, a measured withdrawal of United States troops, the South should be able to defend itself with their current powers. Extended deterrence is described as a nuclear umbrella, meaning they'll use resources to protect the ally in South Korea. According to Chan Se-young in 2019 in the Journal of Strategic Studies, states that extended deterrence has been the main pillar of security alliance between the United States and South Korea. According to Kang Se-woo, a reporter of the Korea Times, reported that in 2016, President Obama, in the summit speech, said, "I want to reaffirm that a commitment to the defense and security of South Korea, including extended deterrence, is unwavering." To support the military, South Korea has had mandatory service for over 50 years. Now that we know the problem and the causes of mandatory military service, let's explore some solutions. Now, one solution is to have an option. Instead of forcing all citizens to join the military, citizens who refuse will be sentenced to 18 months in prison. According to an article in 2020 in the South China Morning Post, Gary Chung reported that South Korea accounts for 93% of these imprisons around the world for reasons of objection. Thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses have been jailed for sticking to their beliefs and refusing to join the military, and they get socially stigmatized for it. Many companies not only do a background check, but they also require you to tell them what type of service they did. The stigma of refusing to join the military will make it impossible to find a job. The best solution is to completely abolish mandatory military service. The beneficiaries of not having this would be students who do not have to postpone their studies and research. Musicians, actors, and anyone with a career don't have to put it aside to join the military. Golf in Korea is a huge sport for men and women. Siwoo Kim and Sang-woon Bae, who are winners on the PGA Tour and won over $1 million in prize money, but they have to serve in the military and postpone their careers. Mandatory military service in South Korea has caused problems that are not only necessarily related to war. So today, I talked about mandatory military service in South Korea. I described to you what mandatory military service in South Korea is and how it's become an issue. I explained the psychological and social factors that stem from mandatory service. And finally, I discussed some solutions to the service in South Korea. Currently in South Korea, there is no refusing to join the military. Thousands have served jail time for refusal. Millions have postponed their studies, and some have lost lucrative opportunities as superstar athletes. The war with North Korea ended over 50 years ago. It's time to stop mandatory military service. So let's tell our friends and family to make it stop.